В данной ситуации Израиль становится очень важной точкой приложения политических сил украинских. И именно поэтому каждый раз происходят волны, не путем так катания, волны обвинений, волны требований, волны.
So Israel is quite important in political sense. So there are constant waves accusations.
Обвинений, предложений, политических, скажем так, лозунгов. Вот, поэтому, конечно, Израиль находится в сложной ситуации давления со всех сторон.
So Israel is in quite a difficult position, considering the pressure.
It seems like Israel is done with all the wars, and we need to enter another war on somebody else's field. And this is the only thing that lasts for happens, right? That's what it seems.
May I add something?
Please.
When you look at the Israeli perspective, then you see there are Jews both in the Ukraine and both in Russia. So therefore, when I look at it as Israeli neutral, I understand that Israel is taking the right status by not exactly getting involved in this conflict, even though it is involved, meaning I understand.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. I can start in, if you don't mind. You had talked about the cost-benefit situation. You talk about that the question is, it is a sovereign politics and non-sovereign politics. But when contemplating and analyzing the situation, one can get an impression that overwhelmingly the vast majority of the elites, not only in Israel but everywhere in the world, do not follow this logic and does not think in these terms at all. Maybe they're following the Friedrich Nietzsche logic that asked 150 years ago, 130 years ago, of the slave, you want to get rid of your shackles, but what purpose? So maybe it's better for them to be answering and to provide and implement answering policies that to get this so-called sovereignty. And okay, we have got it. What are we going to do with this? Maybe they're afraid of it. Modern remain unsovereign and artificial state in some terms.
Michael, international slaves.
Well, most of the people of the world, they didn't hear about it, and they don't know who that is. Obviously, today, Democratic Party is not as friendly to us as Republicans, and we see it. But is it wise to build all of our relationship with the U.S. depending on one relationship with one party, which is the Republican Party? What if tomorrow Republican Party will not be as friendly? So I don't know. On one hand, yes, it is very tempting to be with those that love you, with evangelical Christians, with all those who scream, "We love Israel," with all those who hate Palestinian cause. On the other hand, we have to try to balance, like the fiddle on the roof, right, between the two parties. It's not easy. Not easy, not at all. What do you think? You're silent.
I've been thinking, there's some good points, and I like what Lev said about the difference between a unipolar world and a multipolar world. So as we talk about the U.S., a subject I'm very familiar with, I think it's important that we look at it from a different lens, not from Republicans and elections and Democrats, but from unipolar versus multipolar, because there's a chess game unfolding. And in this chess game, here at the table, we're talking about all the pawns. But I think this discussion merits to address the knights and the rooks and the queens and the kings of this game. The U.S. has undergone a paradigm shift unlike anything that has ever happened in its entire history. In the past, we had a group of super PACs that controlled each political party. Then, in the last 4 to 5 years, that has changed. And a central financial group with shareholders in one company and the other company have taken a financial monopoly of the United States. You may remember the firing of Tucker Carlson from Fox News. This is a very shall we say, a prophecy of what's happening. So it's an omen of what was happening. But there is a group, a financial group in the United States that controls all media, controls Fox News, controls CNN, controls NBC, controls ABC, controls Pfizer, controls Moderna, controls the defense contracting industry, controls the rebuilding contracts for Ukraine, controls education, controls transgender policy worldwide, controls all of these things. It's not unlike the situation we saw historically in Israel in ancient days when the prophet Eliyahu HaNevi, when Elijah the prophet went up against this consolidated group who had consolidated power. And that's happening very clearly in the United States with BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. They have a monopoly. So if we're going to talk about the U.S. elections, it's important to address the U.S. elections and address not just the pawns in the election, but the queens and the kings of the game who are up against, as Lev was discussing, this multipolar world. So there has been a takeover that has occurred in the United States. If you look at all of the side candidates in the election, such as Kennedy or some of the other candidates from the Republican Party, they all talk very candidly about this. Many people are afraid to discuss it, and I was remiss to discuss it as well because the consequences of telling the truth on this subject can be devastating for certain people. So I think if we're going to address Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, the Ukraine fatigue that is set in the United States, it's important that we understand that a monopoly in the United States has changed the dynamic so that no longer is the Democratic Party democratic. No longer is the Republican Party independent of that, of the central financial controls. So I think without a discussion, a candid discussion of what the power brokers in Saudi Arabia and Iran and BlackRock, Vanguard, and Stateside want, then we're talking about a chess game from the perspective of all the pawns on the game. But in order to really address this conflict, which is coming, it's the Ukraine war is just a first phase of what's happening. The pandemic was a first phase. If you look at the pandemic, it's very easy to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but when you look at the facts, who owns Pfizer, who owns Moderna, who owns the gain of function research, and how that all plays into this, it becomes a necessary thing to talk about the chess game from the perspective of the kings and queens of the game rather than the pawns.